I am Frank. 67 years old. Retired history teacher. Widower. Father, and, apparently, the kind of father who's better off watching his only daughter's wedding on a screen rather than being there in person. Yes. That's exactly what she told me, in an email. An email, not a phone call. Not even a text. That I remember opening my laptop that morning, still wearing my reading glasses, coffee cooling by my side. The subject line read, "Dad, about the wedding." I clicked, and there it was. "Dad, I've been thinking. It's probably best if you don't attend the wedding in person. We'll be live streaming everything, so you can watch from home. That way it'll be less stressful for everyone. Thanks for understanding. Laura." Those words hit me harder than any insult ever could. You see, my daughter Laura was everything to me. After my wife, Margaret, passed away a decade ago, Laura was my anchor. My only child. My reason to keep teaching a few more years, even when arthritis made writing on the chalkboard torture. My reason to drag myself out of bed when grief weighed me down. I thought we were close. We had traditions, Sunday breakfasts, silly debates about which movie villains were secretly misunderstood, long drives to nowhere in particular just to talk. When she met Ryan, her fiancé, I welcomed him. Shook his hand firm. Even gave him one of my prized old books as a gesture of trust. I thought he was decent. I thought he cared about her. But as the months rolled by, things shifted. Slowly, subtly. She stopped visiting as often. Our calls shortened. Plans got cancelled because Ryan's family already had something planned. And then the wedding planning began. At first, Laura included me, showing me venue photos, asking if I thought ivory or cream looked better for table linens. But gradually, my voice didn't seem to matter. Ryan's mother, Patricia, became the loudest voice in the room. Everything had to be her way. I noticed Laura shrinking around her, nodding politely, trying to please. And when I offered an opinion, Patricia would smile thinly and say, "That's quaint, Frank. But maybe we'll go with something more modern." I bit my tongue. For Laura's sake. Always for her sake, until the email. Watch through live stream. I read that line again and again. My own daughter was uninviting me. Not even politely suggesting. She was telling me that I closed my laptop, sat in silence, and stared at the framed photo on my mantle, Laura at age 5, missing her 2 front teeth, clinging to my hand at the park. Somewhere between that photo and this email, I had lost her. But I wasn't about to just fade into the background like a ghost. Not after everything I'd given up, not after raising her alone, not after carrying the weight of grief while making sure she never felt it crush her. 2.0. If my daughter thought I would quietly sit in my living room watching her wedding through a live stream, she didn't know her father as well as I thought she did. At first, I considered begging. Writing her back, pouring my heart out. But I knew where that would lead, Ryan or his mother whispering in her ear, convincing her I'd make a scene or draw attention. So instead, I smiled. I pressed reply, typed 2 words, "Understood. Thanks." And hit send. That was the moment my plan began. You see, Ryan's family thought they owned this wedding. They had money, connections, that smug air of superiority that comes with believing they're above everyone else, but I had something they didn't: patience, knowledge, and the truth. I started by quietly calling a few of Laura's childhood friends, the ones Ryan had conveniently left off the guest list because he thought they weren't classy enough. They were furious when they heard. Especially when I told them I wouldn't be allowed to attend either. Then I reached out to some of my old colleagues. Teachers who had known Laura growing up. People who adored her. People she hadn't invited, but who would have loved to celebrate with her. Finally, I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Margaret's sister, my late wife's only sibling, who had always disliked Ryan's family but adored Laura. When she heard I'd been barred, her silence on the phone spoke louder than any words. "Frank," she finally said, "what are you planning?" Nothing reckless, I replied. Just a reminder of who Laura really is. And who raised her. Revenge, you see, doesn't always require rage. Sometimes it requires quiet calculation. I began researching Ryan's family. Patricia, the overbearing mother-in-law-to-be, had a spotless public image, charity boards, social clubs, the works. But ID lived long enough to know spotless often hides the stains. And I found them, through a retired friend who once worked in city records. I uncovered some interesting truths. Patricia's charity foundation had several discrepancies in its financial filings. Nothing illegal on the surface, but questionable enough that, if made public, her reputation would take a serious hit. That I tucked that away. Meanwhile, I started writing something. Not a letter. Not a speech. A story. A story about a father and daughter, about love, sacrifice, and betrayal. My story. Our story. It wasn't for me, it was for her. The day arrived. The wedding was set in a grand estate outside the city, expensive, glamorous, everything Ryan's family wanted. I wasn't on the guest list. But I didn't need to be. You see, ID hired a discreet little crew, an old student of mine now working in event production, along with two of her tech-savvy friends. Their task? Ensure that when the wedding live stream began, a special video would play first. The guests took their seats, both in the hall and online. The screen flickered on. Everyone expected to see the bride and groom. Instead, they saw me, sitting in my modest living room, wearing my best suit, speaking directly into the camera. Hello, I began, voice steady. I'm Frank. Father of the bride. A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. I was told it would be best if I didn't attend today. That I should watch from a distance. So I thought, if I must speak from a distance, I will make sure I'm heard, and then I told my story. I spoke of raising Laura after her mother died, of the nights I stayed awake grading papers while she slept beside me on the couch. Of the times we laughed, argued, dreamed together. Of the sacrifices made quietly, so she could grow without ever knowing how much I gave up. I spoke with love, but also with sorrow. And yet, I said, looking straight into the lens, today, I was told I'm not welcome at my own daughter's wedding. By email. By my little girl, who once swore she'd never forget her father. Gasps. Whispers. Faces turning toward Laura, who by then stood pale and frozen at the edge of the hall. That I continued. But I am not here to ruin this day. No. I am here to remind my daughter of who she is. She is not a pawn in someone else's game. She is not property to be paraded. She is Laura. My Laura. And she deserves a wedding built on love, not control. Then, with a faint smile, I ended. So, my dear, I will not beg for a chair at your table. I will simply say this: I love you. Always have. Always will. And when you remember who you are, when you remember who raised you, I'll be here. Waiting. The screen faded to black, and then chaos. Ryan's family was livid. Patricia especially. She hissed like a cornered snake, whispering to guests that it was a cruel stunt. But the damage was done. Half the guests were whispering about how disgraceful it was to ban the father of the bride. Others were murmuring about Patricia's reputation, especially after my subtle hint about charity built on control. Word spreads fast in circles like theirs. Laura? She broke down. Right there in her gown, tears streaming, torn between the family she was marrying into and the father she had just humiliated. I wasn't there to see it in person, but I didn't need to. I received texts from my allies inside the wedding. One message read, "She's asking for you." But I didn't go. Not that day. Laura came to my house 2 weeks after the wedding. No Ryan. No Patricia. Just Laura. She stood in my doorway, eyes red, hands trembling. "Dad." She whispered. I'm sorry. I let her in. I didn't make it easy for her. Silence hung heavy between us. But when she finally collapsed into tears, confessing how much pressure she'd been under, how Ryan's family had convinced her I'd embarrassed them, I held her. Because beneath the betrayal, she was still my daughter. She begged my forgiveness. I didn't give it right away. I told her forgiveness must be earned, not demanded. And that she had to decide whose voice she wanted to live by, mine, her mother's memory, or Patricia's. It wasn't instant. But cracks had formed in Ryan's family's grip. Cracks that widened with every argument, every seed of doubt planted that day. And in the end, those cracks would bring their empire down. Months later, Patricia's charity scandal broke in the papers, helped along by a quiet packet of documents I slipped to a journalist I trusted. Ryan's family name was dragged through the mud. Their perfect image shattered. As for Laura, she eventually came to me, trembling, saying she couldn't stay in that family anymore. She filed for annulment within a year, and when she did, she came back, not as a child, not as someone ashamed of her father, but as a woman who finally remembered who she was. So here I am, at 67. I sit in my garden, sipping coffee, watching the sunrise. Laura visits often now. We've rebuilt slowly, carefully. She told me once, "Dad, that video. It saved me. It made me see." And though part of me still aches for the humiliation I endured, another part knows this. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes it's about truth. About forcing someone to open their eyes when they'd rather stay blind. My daughter tried to erase me from her wedding. Instead, I made sure she would never forget me again.